welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
And what happens when all the threads of the tapestry have been traveled? Do you then go over them again and again in an attempt to relive the best parts? Because nothing will be like that first experience. Nothing.
Look at you reading things.
I tell you, Brandon, you know to hit me hard immediately.
God! It's your line!
I know it's my line. Oh my goodness. Why did you choose that line?
That's a good question.
In the process of picking taglines to Skiffy and Fanty Show, I just go through the thing again and just randomly hone in on the thing that strikes me the most, and this just reaches out to me in that sense of, well, that is a very good question. When you do essentially know how everything goes, is there a thing that you will value so deeply that you want to revisit it? Because that's not where that joy came from. That joy came from having it the very first time.
Interesting.
So when I created The Undying, and The Undying are, I know that we're allowed to be spoilery, but still save things, but The Undying are very intrinsic to the two books, and you just have to know about them. Some reviewers say, oh, these are gods. And I'm like, no, I never intended for them to be gods. They're undying, but not immortal. But the way that they experience time, the way that they experience life, as I said, is that they have a finite set of experiences, but they're allowed to jump back and forth on the timeline. So you can indeed revisit things, but eventually it's this is it. This is your limited set. You can revisit if you want to. You can relive if you want to, especially with fresh knowledge of your other experiences. But there's no more after that. So that was the death in a way that I imagined for them. And then of course there's the option to just not go back, to just dissipate, or well, there are other options as well, but that's probably a little spoilery, so I won't go into that. But yes, it was, I am kind of proud of that line, because it was I didn't just want to have your common or garden, immortal or quasi-immortal being that fantasy is full of. I was no, I want a creature that actually, a being that experiences time in a completely different way from us. And then when you have a completely different understanding of what cause and effect is, what does that mean for crime and punishment? What does that mean for intention and sin and redemption?
There's a lot there. Okay, we actually have to continue the script, apparently, but
yes, we still have to officially do the things that we are required in the bylaws to begin a Skiffy and Fanty podcast.
Well, we haven't even introduced the person that's here, and technically only one of our names has been said. Yeah. So to be fair, they're gonna figure it out. Oh gosh, what is this episode about? No, it's about George R. R. Martin's pants. That's what it's about. Yeah, we stole them from Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Somebody in the same country as him smack him with that, honestly. Anyway.
Anyway. Well, I'm Shaun.
And I'm Brandon.
And today we will be talking with the talented and fabulous Barbadian writer, Dr. Karen Lord, author of The Best of All Possible Worlds, The Galaxy Game, and The Blue Beautiful World, and editor of New Worlds Old Ways, Speculative Tales from the Caribbean. And we should note, part of what we're talking about today is there are new beautiful editions of books by Dr. Karen Lord, and welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you so much. And thank you especially because I requested to be invited back. That was very bold of me. But we had our last conversation about The Blue Beautiful World, and it was a fantastic conversation. And Brandon gave me a surprise by turning up. I didn't even know he was going to be there, and we had an amazing podcast. And then afterwards, I was like, can we do this again when the new editions come out for Redemption, Indigo, and Unraveling? And then everybody was like, yay, let's do that. And I'm like, yes. So here we are, about to talk about, Redemption, as I said, is almost 15 years old, published in 2010. Unraveling came out just before the pandemic, 2018, 2019. It was one of those situations where anything too close to pandemic or during the pandemic is like a blur. But yeah, the books are finally together. You write a book and you write a sequel, you write them so many years apart, almost 10 years apart. And worse yet, you write one with a very family friendly, folkloric, narrator driven sort of style. And then you write the other one like horror. And, and it's like almost like two separate subgenres. And you're like, oh, yes, read these together. Not to your children, though, but read them together. Because they're basically the continuation of a story. They're basically the continuation of a character's arc and discovery. And there were various questions that I left unanswered in Redemption that I come back again to look at those questions in Unraveling and see if I can find, if not an answer, at least a resolution.
Interesting. Well, so there's a lot here.
Yeah.
But I want to start with really big questions, if I can, because
of course,
to me, this seems like a really good opportunity to treat this interview a little bit like what would happen if someone got like one of those, what do you call them? Like Grandmaster or like Life Achievement Award kind of things, where we're like looking. I mean, you've got a lot of novels out, a lot of stories, you've done a lot of work, and it seems like a good opportunity to kind of go, well, let's reflect on your career thus far,
okay.
Right? This Redemption Indigo came out almost exactly, it's 14 years technically, because I believe the book came out originally by Small Beer Press in 2010.
Yes.
Eventually came out a couple years later, I believe, by Joe Fletcher. And then the most recent book was released last year, which is Blue Beautiful World. That was 2023. And in that time, you have released 3 other novels between those two, plus an edited collection. And
2 edited collections, to be frank.
2 edited collections, excuse me, and much work in general. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a question that you can take any direction you want, really. But looking back on your career as a writer, how do you feel about your career? Like, what would you say are the key takeaways for you in your career, I guess, would be the question I would ask.
That's a very interesting question. And the first thing I would say is that my career did not unfold the way I thought it would unfold. But to be fair, I didn't come into it with some very, rigid expectations. I didn't come into it expecting to write like definite trilogies. I didn't come into it expecting to, say, create one set of characters and stick with them and so forth. I did, in fact, want it to be a journey of discovery, not only in terms of, see what I'm good at writing and see what I like, but also feel free to change what I write. Now, the people who do the marketing are probably hugely frustrated at that because one of the nice things about writers who deliver more or less consistent stuff is you can say, well, we know what a Karen Lord book is, and they can encourage the readers to then like fall in line behind this particular type of book. But I've been moving around quite a bit, and the books that I used to enjoy reading are not necessarily the books that I enjoy reading now, and they're definitely not the books that I enjoy writing now. So I really do have to say that in terms of what this means to my career, I would not recommend it to an emerging writer. I would say to an emerging writer, if you want to pay your bills, if you want to have certain level of stability, then there's certain things you do need to think about, like your marketability and how you're going to do certain things or whatever. And I've been treating this like a grand thought experiment, really. I've been distilling a lot of my academic research and my various bits of experience or whatever into these stories. And we've discussed a bit of this because we talked about the sociological fiction aspect of the Signa Spada novels. Yeah. And I am here to tell you that the Redemption in Indigo and Unraveling novels, the Redemption novels as I call them, are really kind of theology books, theology-fied. And I don't always lead with that because especially for Americans, there's a bit of a fraught discussion in terms of what religion is supposed to be about. And I noticed I did say it's not religion, I said it's theology.
Yeah.
Which is a little different. There's questions of things like questions about suffering, questions about free will. So you could call it philosophy if you like. It doesn't have to have a particular kind of religious tint to it. But because I'm also dealing with not just the human, but the beyond human, the larger than human, or the more powerful than human, or the more knowing than human. That's why I still would say it's theology. So that's a rambling way to answer your question, but yes, this is still in the vein of Cygnus Beta, me looking at the things that I've studied and that have made me curious, to look at both from a factual point of view and from a what if thought experiment point of view. And this is just another branch of it. This is just another way of dealing with it. Oh, and I also want to say, Brandon, you can tell me if you think I'm correct in this, that when I write the Cygnus Beta novels, I do write for a global audience. But when I write the redemption novels, I am writing for my region.
Mm-hmm.
I am.
Interesting.
So that's the other big difference between the two.
And I will say that because, we have had this conversation privately about why I should stop reading reviews for other people's books. So I will not go very much in the weeds about that, but I do think that it is very obvious in how people read Unraveling, and especially Redemption and Indigo, where you can tell that there are people who get it, and it's always people from the region. And I think that doing that purposefully is obviously a very radical decision, given, as you say, it is not easy to be marketable in this world.
Yes.
But further to one of the other things that you were saying, I'm kind of intrigued by, first, the idea of what a Karen Lord book is, because I do think there is an answer to that question ultimately. I do think that the quintessential Karen Lord book is science fiction about the humanities engaging very viscerally through
I like that.
extended metaphor. Like, I dig the fact that Redemption and Indigo and Unraveling are so strongly theological, while not being, like, attached to answering questions or making assumptions about a specific faith. And I think that that's actually really fascinating. But one of the things that is obviously fascinating as well is, as you say, Unraveling is a very different book from Redemption and Indigo, in a very visceral way. So this is a twofold question, the first of which is obviously, what is Redemption and Indigo, and what is Unraveling, for people who have no idea what these books are, so we can continue to encourage people to buy these new editions. But also, why did you make the radical departure in subgenre that you did, which is not only horror in that sense, but it does very obviously have a kind of detective fiction, crime fiction flavor to it as well.
Yeah.
What drove that decision, especially considering that they are so far apart, that I'm absolutely confident that Unraveling was not an idea that you had in mind when you had finished Redemption? Like, what came to you? What was the spark that came to you that triggered Unraveling as a notion in your brain?
So, bold of you to assume that I had any firm intention whatsoever. But let's run with it. Let's say that I was actually paying more attention. So what is Unraveling? What is Redemption and Indigo? Redemption and Indigo is my debut novel. So it is the novel in which you can see that I'm really doing this thing for the first time. I'm really kind of testing things out and so forth. And I actually feel it got a lot of awards. It got a lot of attention in ways that almost surprised me, because maybe what people really click with is the narrative voice, because I did do this thing which basically is a storyteller telling a story. Took one of my favorite folk tales, which was from Senegambia region, found it in a book of folk tales from around the world, called Ansige Karamba the Glutton. Only used that material for 3 chapters and then said, now we're going to spin off and do something different and just imagine this fantasy land, which is half West African, half Caribbean. I do not claim that it is African. I've not been to the continent yet. Okay, so but I know our culture and how much of that is grounded from our ancestors. So that in some respects, even though I was writing it for the region, oddly enough, also made it quite accessible to people because it was a tale meant to be told simply. It was a tale meant to be told as if you could in fact read it to a child, and that was a good book for me to have as my debut because in terms of craft is a thing that takes time. Craft is a thing that takes many more works, and I absolutely love Redemption for the things that it does do, but I also know there were several things that I couldn't do at that point in my career, and that's why Redemption is the book it is and not a different kind of book. So that segues into the answer to your other question. Why is Unraveling the way it is? So first of all, I have no control over what my books decide to be. I wish I did. I really wish I did. I really wish I could say, you are going to be X and it will be X. But no, I start writing it and then it tells me what it's going to be. And then I just tidy things up afterwards. So what happened after Redemption and Indigo was that even before it got published, I started Unraveling. I started this sequel because, as I said, I knew there were some things that I hadn't really wrapped up. I knew there were some questions I really hadn't answered. The title says it's about redemption, and yet you don't really have a full sense of closure about whether redemption has been achieved. So I started to write Unraveling, and whereas Redemption was all about the simplicity of the telling and recognizing that I was still trying to acquire quite a lot of writer's craft skills, Unraveling was about pushing myself to do things that were hard. And this went about as well as you would think, and that's why it took 10 years to write.
Yeah.
Not only did it take 10 years to write, well, almost 10 years, not only did it take that long, but I basically wrote the best of all possible worlds in an effort to let me explain the background. It wasn't even procrastination. It was literally I would have writer's block working on Unraveling. Mm-hmm. I would be I've put myself in this corner where I am decided to do weird things of time and the perception of time, but now I can't figure out how to write it as a writer. And then I would go and write a chapter of the best of all possible worlds. Because at that time, the best of all possible worlds was just writing exercises. So to give you an example, one of the clearest examples of that, I don't know if you remember a chapter in the best of all possible worlds called Falling, where the protagonist has actually suffered a kind of a minor brain injury, and her memory keeps resetting. But she's still the first person narrator. So she's telling the story, and she herself doesn't understand that she's looping back every time she goes to sleep and has a dream, and then she keeps thinking she's coming back to the same day, and everybody else is you've lost the day, you've lost it. She's like, what? And that was literally my writing exercise to help me do something similar in Unraveling. In terms of time perception, in terms of, I think it was probably the bit where protagonist, both of Redemption and of Unraveling, kind of goes back in his own timeline to a place where it's still him, but he's also he's not experiencing the moment for the first time. So he's bringing back with him a sort of an overlaid consciousness of the new person that he is, the new entity he has become, and in all the experiences he's had since then. But then he goes back into that thing and he relives it. And so I was trying to do various challenging things like that, and I simply did not have the actual writer's tools to do it properly. And it took me a while, and it took me a lot of block, and it took me, turning out at least another 2 books before I acquired enough of the skills to pull the manuscript together. And there were some fairly rough drafts, rough looking manuscripts. When I thought I'd finish it, I'm like, and then there were things that I kind of changed midway, and then I would be like, you know what it's like. You write a manuscript, and then you're like, okay, I'm writing this, and you're like, oh no, wait a minute, this is better. And then when you're supposed to go back and like correct all the things, you don't remember all the things, and you're like, there's this big like plot hole there. Oh man, it was. And then worst of all, or best of all, by that time my style had so developed that when I looked at the manuscript as a whole, I was like, it is clearly Karen Lord, writer, not yet published, 2009, who is in these initial chapters. And that sounds so different now from Karen Lord later that I have to literally go back and write the whole beginning, as it were, from scratch, so that the style is synchronized, the voice is synchronized, narrative voice. So yes. And how did it turn into a crime horror novel? How did it turn into a sort of I had this absolutely amazing review from, I think it was Lit Hub or something, where a reviewer said that what I basically did is I took the regular procedural structure and I turned it on its head, where it's not humans doing the procedural, it's the supernatural beings who are doing the procedural, and the human has to kind of come along and just like fit in with whatever techniques and approaches that they have. And I was like, shoot, yeah, I wasn't like consciously thinking of doing that, but that's exactly what happened. But I honestly did not want it to be horror, because horror is a genre that I find very challenging. I know now why that is. We've all been recently awakened to the whole concept of darn, I forgot the proper word. That thing where you can't hold aphantasia, the one where you can't hold a picture in your head. There are people who are writing and reading for whom the words are words on the page. They don't actually form a picture of what's happening in their heads. And when I read that, and then you do the whole thing about, where are you on the spectrum of whatever, I realized that I have got a really, really vivid imagination. So I can't read horror like words on a page. There's just far too much happening in my brain, and it goes into my nightmares and whatever. So me and horror as a genre have never really got along. And I had one of my biggest pieces of writer's block with Unraveling, because there was something happening in the book that was so heinous that I did not want to write it. And I was trying to write around it. And the book was like, I don't care about your feelings. This is what has to happen. And then what I just like broke down and said, fine, I'll write it. The rest of the book flowed. And I was like, I hate you. But it was correct for the entire theme and premise. And, so yeah, I'm not gonna spoil what that bit was. I mean, if I say heinous and you read the book, you'll know what heinous, what that particular bit is. And I will in fact offer as trigger warning that if you are, some of my friends who are parents find it really, really difficult to read about child harm in any fiction, for obvious reasons. And that's one of the big triggers in the book, I'm afraid. But the whole question was, Redemption in Indigo was a book about the choices we make, and how the choices we make, we are ultimately responsible for them. But Unraveling is also a book about those who have had their choices taken away from them, or whose choices are so limited that it's not at all a level playing field in terms of talking about, you're responsible for this, or you can change your life by making this choice. Sometimes no, you've been presented with such a narrow set of options that no, you can't change your life, because the systems around you are putting far too much pressure. They're boxing you in. They're not making it possible. So if redemption was all about possibilities, Unraveling was about, well, when you narrow down the possibilities, then what do you do? And I do come to a resolution. I do come to a kind of an answer. And the answer is very much a kind of a, you got to leave the master's house. However much you renovate it, it's still going to be the master's house. You got to build something for yourself.
Okay, I have 1,000 questions, and
Yes, I can see all of the gears turning in your brain.
I want to ask. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question that's pertinent to sort of the last few things that you've been saying, and then I think the other question that I really want to ask is general enough that it doesn't require us to. I think I'll forget to ask this if I ask that other one. So, when we interviewed you about Blue Beautiful World, you talked about. You I can't remember the exact language you used, but something to the effect of like war and fighting and like sort of violence as a resolution mechanic was something that you didn't particularly find compelling. Yeah, you were like,
yes.
I don't even know the exact words, but you just definitely did not like it, and it comes across in those works. And I would say most of your work that while violence may occur, it is not typically the thing that is the most dominant or most important component of a resolution for whatever the plot point of the story is, or whatever the problem is that needs to be resolved. I think this is why Brandon earlier, it was quite apt when he suggested that your work could be seen as like science fiction through the perspective of the humanities, which is not about the sort of violent side of society, and more about how do we find resolution to these problems that other people would resort to violence as the mechanic. And when you were saying that horror for you is a very difficult genre because in your mind, right, it is rather visceral. It's very vividly imagined. And so you could imagine Unraveling, which involves murder and disturbing imagery, as a writer, be rather intensive if you have that. And so I wondered if that also was a factor in why war, violence, fighting, cutting off heads and hands, those kinds of horrible things is not typically where your work wants to rest. Is that also a factor?
Sorry, let me be sure that I'm answering the right question. You're saying the vividness of my imagination, is that a factor in my dislike of making violence a central mover of a story or leading to resolution or whatever? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm asking. I just said it with thousands more words.
No. I just like to repeat back and make sure that I've got it right. Is that now? I'm still working with this idea. Listen, I know people's brains work differently, and yet I'm still always awed and amazed the more I discover just how differently our brains work. And I would say that although I think it must be a factor, because it's one of those things where you can't say that it wouldn't have some kind of impact, I do actually think that it comes right back down to the whole question of the huge disconnect I was having between the narrative violence of the heroic story in text and on screen and on stage, and the reality of violence in this world. So if we're giving people books and movies and whatever where you can go on your revenge spree, or you can do this and you can do that, and I mean, I know a lot of this is escapism and wish fulfillment and not reality, and that's the whole point of it. But it's so unbalanced right now. There's so much of that, and yes, there are the kind of more realist or almost nihilistic ones, which are like, no, if you do violence will do you right back, and it's not going to be pretty. Although there's a bit of that still happening, it just seems to me to be like a smaller amount. So the seduction of violence as a tool really gets like indoctrinated in us from very early, where there's this idea that, well, if I become the right kind of hero, then I'm going to be able to make this sort of violence work. And I think we try to understand that fiction is not the same as reality, but I mean, this happens to us. I think to use another example, almost on the flip side, it's like reading romance novels, you know, and understanding, okay, this is a fictionalized, depiction of a relationship, which is meant to go to a happy ever after or a happy for now. You know that it's meant to go there. Similarly, you know, your revenge plot, whatever, you know the person who's been wronged is going to come out on top. So we know these things in our bones because we know what the tropes are, we know what the formats are, and yet coming into reality, we always think maybe I can get that story to work for me. The damage it causes, the romance novels cause, I think, is probably less than the damage that the violent stories and movies might cause. We could have a nice debate about that probably. There's certain kinds of emotional hurt that can be quite as lasting as physical hurt. But yeah, I think it was that disconnect that I was really pushing back at and thinking, you know, can't we have stories that are not necessarily realist in the sense of, you know, pure realism, but are realist in the sense of, okay, do you really want a solution here? Do you really want a resolution here? Do you really want something that could actually work, that doesn't follow these particular, tropes and expectations? And also, and I'm still working this through, so this is why this is such a long answer. I'm still working this through.
You're good. Go for it.
I began to also realize that another reason why I could no longer believe in those heroic stories is because they're ultimately deeply imperial in their agenda. The kind of person who is allowed to get away with certain things on that Hollywood screen, it's very clear. It's very clear who they're depicting. It's very clear what the expectations are. And that, to me, makes it even more to be avoided, makes it more dishonest, and makes it more unpalatable for me. I really do want to be able to tell a story that anyone, even those who have been in minorities that have been denied the heroic arc, can say, okay, I can see myself in this story and I can see my happy for now or happy a bit ending in this. I can see my resolution in this that is satisfying, even if it's not like, you know, the sort of triumphal ending of the Hollywood style. So yeah, that's my most radical statement about that, I guess.
I do think to some degree it is. I mean, radical is a word that I think sometimes we're a little cavalier with, but I agree that there's a radicalness to it, in especially given the genres that you're operating in, where so many of the dominant stories are effectively war stories, you know, typically in space. You know, and you do have a lot of those very traditional, like, John Wick style characters. I enjoy John Wick, to be clear. It's a very interesting film series. It does some fun stuff, but it is, I think you're correct to point out that those being the dominant ways that we see conflict resolved is, I think, somewhat of a disservice, because maybe they're not as flashy because someone doesn't do like a ninja flip and then kick someone in the face, you know, and like there aren't explosions, but the idea that you could instead find a solution to a very serious problem that is not violent, that involves communication and conversation and empathy, etc. Yeah, sure, it doesn't come with explosion. I mean, I guess you could start explosions if you wanted fireworks. You could just do it. But at the same time, there's something radical to resist that, to resist the violence, the explosions, the death, the mayhem, for something, frankly, that's cleaner, that is nicer, that has less collateral damage, that has more people happy in the end because they're not destroyed. You know, I mean, it dawns on me, like, you watch something like, I love Lethal Weapon, But
Mm-hmm.
I just think, like, if you take 5 seconds to think what would it be like to live in the Lethal Weapon universe, you're just like a bystander on the side of the road, and the cops show up, shoot up your car, blow it up, blow up the whole block. All your windows are broken. They burned all your stuff because they fought some guys in a car, and that car crashed into your building. And then it's like, well, good luck with your insurance claim. And I'm like, even if I did die,
you're talking about living in the Lethal Weapon world. I'm just happy I don't live in the Marvel universe.
Oh my god!
Because
Right?
once the Avengers have swept through, whew,
yeah. Once you're in the global south, and all it takes is Captain America to be there for a minute and a half, and suddenly entire skyscrapers are now reduced to ash.
Well, hey,
why don't we ever have the story where he shows up later?
New York pretty badly. Don't forget, they messed up New York pretty badly first before they went global with their mayhem.
This is true.
It's true.
But you see, this is why when I was looking at the whole, no, we're not going to start talking about the Marvel movies. That's a segue. But I will say that when you were describing that, the whole, can we have a better resolution without the explosions? There were actually 2 movies recently-ish that I thought did begin to go down that route. Now, one of them was based on a short story that didn't have explosions in it. So at first I was kind of annoyed that explosions had to be there. But Arrival, which adapted Ted Chiang's The Story of Your Life, I thought actually did an extremely good job of explaining why communication and connection was so much more important than the conflict and the strife. So that was one. And then the other one, which I saw recently because I kept putting off watching it because I was just too stressed. I wanted to watch it when I had more bandwidth. But I finally watched Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah, okay.
Look at your face, Brandon. Yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh. The things this is saying, when I say that a movie is intelligent, when I say that a movie is clever, these are very trite words. But I'm still going to say it for this movie because it did indeed address the whole, is violence achieving what you need it to achieve? Really? Mm-hmm. Are there other ways to fight? Are there other ways to, as you say, come to the conclusion that doesn't involve a whole bunch of collateral damage along the way?
Yeah.
So yeah. I want us to get there. I want our stories to evolve. And it's important that our stories evolve because, as I was saying to, I don't know if it was a mentee or a workshop people or whatever, we don't write the way they used to write in the 1800s or the 1600s or whatever. We have changed our style. We have changed our themes, our focus. We've changed our genres. There's so many things that just reflect how we are changing as a society and as a culture. And I just want to be one of the writers that is kind of on the cutting edge of that, which is probably why my career looks like it does, to go back to your original question, Shaun. It's like, my question is always not, can I write a book like the books that have gone before? But can I write a book that is at the cutting edge, that is still drawing people in, but that is doing something different, something unique?
That's that's a tough task to put on yourself.
Yeah.
Well,
it's hard.
I enjoy it. I'm not doing it because, some people put these tasks on themselves because it's the only way to prove I'm a real writer. It's like, no, I don't care about stuff like that. I know I'm a real writer. I just want to enjoy it. And to enjoy it is to not be bored. And to not be bored is indeed to just ride that boundary line between choice and chaos.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That works.
I like that.
So, another thing kind of reveals itself to me as we're having that discussion about violence in particular. And that's obviously about some of the characters that are core to this duology, and in particular the ways in which they are core to Unraveling. And that's, of course, Adlet and Chance, who, as you have stated, are incredibly powerful. And in another kind of piece of media,
Mm-hmm.
that would be, and this is me putting it as benignly as I could possibly put it. If someone were to write a police procedure with characters like Adjit and Chance, people would just be exploding all the time. Like, problems would be solved with ultraviolence and supernatural control over the universe all the time. But what is particularly interesting about Unraveling is not only that they don't make things easier, they're still engaging in a process, but also that process, that restraint, is, I think, particularly meaningful to the story. The idea that even with a certain kind of access to the universe that mere mortals do not have, there are some problems that can't just easily be solved.
Thank you. You can't just like throw bombs at everything.
Yeah, but you can't also just like remake the universe in a way where this problem no longer happens as well. And I think that that's also very fascinating because there are procedurals with supernatural characters in them where the resolution is always, I have been given this tool that I can use either for violence or in this unique, interesting way that will always resolve issues neatly and tidily all the time. And, like, part of the reason why this question comes to me is because the last time we met in person, we were talking about one of those procedurals. I was introducing you to a show called Forever, with Ian Griffin.
Yes.
And we were talking about the fact that one of the things that I enjoy about that show is the protagonist is immortal, and that's the worst thing that could ever happen to him.
Exactly.
And it creates
and
so
he's
much
desperately
problems.
trying to figure out how to die. Yes.
Yes. And I'm curious, like, what part of that process was also, like, a part of your creative engine for Unraveling as well? Like, what is it about the supernatural and its engagement with the real world and the complexities that we cannot easily wipe over in the real world that was the reason why Adlet and Chance operate in the world in the way that they do?
So Ajit and Chance are the trickster and the Indigo Lord from Redemption and Indigo. But by the time we see them, spoiler, in Unraveling, they have a dual identity because they've also become human. So there's this really interesting kind of balance in a way where on the one hand, they are, as you say, still these very powerful beings. But now they have had some years of being human in their experience. And I think that it does for them increase their empathy and understanding of the fact that you can't just like, you know, come in with a big stick, as it were, and just like change things when it comes to the human world. The trickster of Redemption and Indigo was very manipulative. The Indigo Lord of Redemption and Indigo was very, vicious in some ways. But Ajit and Chance, who have had Palma as their mother, pause and think about the consequences of their action a bit. And in a way, although I did not think of it as at the time, I suppose one of the best cures for the kind of mentality that is too drunk on power, that does decide to like solve things with like by smashing them or whatever. The only real antidote to that is that you have to completely have a new upbringing. You have to go back to scratch. You have to almost reprogram yourself. For those of us who are already adults, I guess it's therapy. But for the protagonist that I had, I was like, I am literally sending them back to being reborn as helpless human beings, going through that experience, having someone like Palma raise them, because we've already seen how marvelous Palma is in terms of her empathy and her choices in the first book. And then when you have them go through that process, how does that change them as these super powerful beings? Yes, they are indeed going to be more restrained. They are indeed going to think fully about the consequences of what they're doing and how it affects not just individual humans, but humans on a larger scale. There's something I want to mention that's like hugely spoilery, and I don't know if I should get into it. So you have to let me know if there are like spoiler zones in your podcast. You can say to people, okay, you know, shut off here and then come back or whatever.
Let's say this is the spoiler zone.
Okay,
Stop.
this is the spoiler zone where I'm about to talk about the end of Unraveling. So you really need to not be here.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the ways in which I found resolution for the question of is there redemption for chance is that for a being for whom cause and effect don't work the same way, the atrocities that he committed were already part of his tapestry. And patience unraveling him at the end of redemption so that he could have that human experience did not erase that those atrocities were going to happen. And the splinter part of him indeed was what carried out those murders. But even though the human line chance was not actually like directly responsible for the murders, it was still him. And the resolution was in him facing each victim and hearing their story and acknowledging like their importance and their presence and giving them a voice and giving them, because there's so many procedurals you see where the victims are almost like props. They're swept away very quickly, or they're just, you know, propping up the plot that to go to a certain conclusion. And this was one where even these supposedly unimportant people, these people who are illegals, refugees, whatever you want to call them, they were important enough for him to stop and say, no, I'm just going to listen to you. I may be this immensely powerful being. I may have been the one who, like, you know, caused your death. But this is actually another powerful thing that I'm doing where I just hear your story and guide you on that journey to, you know, and again, I just sort of leave it open. I'm not saying he's escorting them into heaven or whatever, but he is also their psycho pump. He also takes them on that journey, you know, to whatever is beyond death. So, so all of that, I think, was still very much connected to him having gone through the experience of being human. That reprogramming, that understanding what it is to be weak. Now, we mentioned theology, and I'm just going to say, without like belaboring it, because it wasn't meant to be like this is not an allegory by any stretch of the imagination. But in a way, this is what I find most compelling about Christianity in its pure form, not in the forms that we see in certain countries. Let's be clear about that. Because you have so many prior religions which are all about gods that are very powerful, gods that are demanding sacrifice, gods that are whimsical and doing whatever they please, Greek gods, for example. And then you have this story where a god decides to become human and become weak and become vulnerable, and to basically allow this incredible torture to be inflicted upon him, and to have the power to like avoid all that, but to say, no, I'm actually, as you say, it's the restraint, right? It's the restraint, it's whatever. And you know, also with that kind of and I mean, we're not talking about somebody who didn't have the empathy and whatever to begin with, but that experience of being a human mixed with divinity is something I do find really fascinating, and you don't find other places. Now, yes, you have other mystery religions where also and so was a son of God, and usually that means that there was some massive heroic person, you know. It doesn't often come with, like, you know, suffering and restraint and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So
Hercules does not get that moment to be vulnerable.
True.
So you know, I was looking at all that as well. I was like, what is it about the decision to step back and be weak when you do have power that is in itself a powerful thing to do? What is it about having the option to smash everything if you care to do so, and saying, I'm not going to smash everything, I'm going to find another way through, even if that way almost destroys me. It's very compelling. It's very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I
will
take the
admit those are the
spoilers off?
most compelling parts of the story of Jesus Christ. Like, I mean, because you brought it here, I will mention idly the thing about Jesus that I relate to the most is the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah,
because there is something genuinely really deeply humanizing about everybody else around this person knowing that they are the most powerful person that they've ever met, and they have to go in a corner by themselves where no one else can see them and go, God, why you do this to me?
Exactly.
Please stop.
It's like, no, do we have to do this? Do we really have to do this?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's you're quite right. That's the bit that hits hard. That's the bit that's like, this wasn't a capricious thing. This wasn't he wasn't going to go in there with some kind of supernatural anesthesia and it was going to be fine. It was just all symbolic. No, it was going to be, and I've heard a priest say as well that another important part of the whole thing is that you also have to imagine that there's a point at which sort of during crucifixion, it's not enough to have the physical pain. You must also have the pain of feeling abandoned by God. And that is also, as it were, the crux of it, because that's a very human experience as well. Who's among us, whether or not we're religious, have not felt just completely abandoned, in the sense that there's nobody who, like, if I may swear, gives a shit about what happens to you. There's nobody who cares about you. You're not anybody in anybody's hero arc. You're not in anybody's, you're not anybody who's going to be saved. You're not that important. That feeling of abandonment is really core and really key. And in a way, I tried to weave that into into the story of Unraveling as well, because that's a lot of where the narrowing of choice comes in, when people feel as if there's nobody who's going to fight for them, there's nobody in their corner, and everything just seems to be working against them. And of the people who were killed, all of them were in those sort of situations where they're in a city, which is a city that almost like runs on a very highly specialized kind of networking. And if you are not part of that professional network, you're completely shut out. You're completely shut out. You can't get anywhere. You can't do anything. You're always going to be of this lower tier class, and the utter like frustration and the real psychic pain that brings. I wanted to show how the victims had that. So yeah, theology all the way through there.
Yeah. I admire it so much. Like, I could have that Christianity conversation forever. But also I appreciate that, I especially considering everything else that Unraveling is doing, that it is willing to go, we do not have power because it resolves problems. We are being made human because being made human helps us understand why these problems persist.
Yeah. Oh, sweet. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we're gonna run out of time soon, but I want to ask a question because it's related to something you said a while ago. Because supposedly Nala Hopkinson said of you that you are the impish love child of Amos Tutuola and Garcia Marquez, which was in a review, quoted in a review of Redemption and Indigo, I will just say. And I find that such a curious combination. And I'm gonna guess that they said Amos Tutuola because of the folklore, not necessarily stylistically, and the Garcia Marquez perhaps because of some of the playing around with genre, we'll say, less so than, I don't know necessarily stylistically, although you certainly have more in common stylistically, I think, with Garcia Marquez, which is not an insult to Amos Tutuola or anything. It's just that very different. And so the question I really have is, I'm kind of curious, when you talked about, going back and kind of thinking about style when you were going to Unraveling, and even thinking about, how your work has come in the last 14 years, thinking about your style. How do you kind of think of your writing style, and how have you seen it sort of develop? What do you think kind of differentiates it from when you wrote Redemption and Indigo to sort of where you are with your sort of most recent work? Because I would say there are differences there. They feel like different works by an author who's been working, but you're the writer, and so I'm kind of curious your view on that.
So this is an interesting question. Redemption and Indigo, as I said, was a good debut novel for me because the narrator is a character. So what you see there in this style is the personality of the narrator itself, and not like my personality, if that makes sense. Ironically, The Best of All Possible Worlds is in a similar vein because you have a first-person protagonist, and what you see there is the character's personality and the character's way of saying things and perceiving things and what have you. So I guess it's only by the time you get to the Galaxy game that you begin to get a lot of like complete third person, sort of separate whatever coming from me. And what I would say at that point is that I still enjoy the concept of multiple voices, because even when you look at the Galaxy game, the conceit is still that I'm looking at the journals and the recordings and reports of various people and somehow transcribing them into a book. So even though there are bits that are like heavily, say, like third person objective or whatever, it's still got a flavor of the person who is central to that part. And dear God, I don't even know if I'm answering your question. I'm trying.
It's okay.
and ultimately, I think that the dancing between characters' voices, and then also the stepping back and allowing my own voice to be the main thing, is mainly about not trying really hard not to imitate any writer I've read. I don't think that I find it difficult to do. I just want to point that out. But I am conscious of it because, first of all, I do have some advantages. Brandon, you know about this. We come from the West Indies. We already have a cadence. We already have an oral tradition. We already have something in our voice that's going to sound different to the rest of the world. You got to kind of take that and run with it because it's your strength. And also because it becomes a weakness to suppress that and try to become anything else. But the other thing as well is that if you work on being imitative, it actually, sometimes I find it stifles your voice more. So rather than imitate, I was like, I will always happily like put on another character's voice, explore who they are, and give them free rein and let that be part of the book. But I will never imitate another writer's voice because I feel as if that is just not a worthwhile thing to do unless you're very specifically, well, don't get me wrong, I've collaborated, I've done co-writing with Tobias Mikel, where precisely what you're doing is making sure that your voice and their voice matches so much that nobody can see where the seams are. And that's also a really fascinating exercise, but that's just it. You're doing it very consciously and you do it for that project, and then you put it down and you move on to the next one and you don't do that again. And I think that I just really try to approach it from the point of view of play and the point of view of not feeling constrained. And if I choose to restrict myself, it's like choosing a sonnet form. If I choose to do it a particular way, it's because I've decided this is the format that works. But having the freedom and flexibility to be able to either go deeply into a particular type of voice or whatever. And Brandon, you must tell me, but I think in a way I do have a different voice between the Redemption novels and the Scifi novels, because I think I think, and I'm really putting myself on the line here, that I allow myself to be a little more poetic in the redemption novels. And I don't always do that because it feels like an indulgence, but I do enjoy doing it.
Writers are allowed to indulge. That's our job. But I do agree with you, and in particular, I think the things that I enjoy about those two books, and especially Unraveling in comparison to Redemption and Indigo, is that because they feel like fables, like there is still a fabulous energy that is moving through Unraveling that while everything else is happening is actually really endearing. Because it feels then like you're not reading a crime novel or detective novel that just so happens to have supernatural elements in it. It feels like you're reading a fable that just so happens to have procedural elements in it, and that's actually really neat. So yeah, I do think those distinctions in voice are very powerful. It's kind of why I enjoy each of them in different ways.
Nice. Thank you.
I do think there's something to be said about, your this work and Unraveling, especially Redemption in Indigo. I think there's a reason why when people talk about your work and they say which of your works feels like it's from the region you're from, they would say Redemption in Indigo in particular. They might say Unraveling. And then they might say the other works are by somebody from the region, but they aren't necessarily as rooted in the region in the same way, which I think kind of goes back to something you had said much earlier. I don't know that I fully agree with that characterization, but I think stylistically and thematically, in some ways, there are pretty stark differences in the works in terms of the kinds of things you're using. But I think that the character of you as the writer is in both of them, which is indistinguishable from where you are from, if that makes sense. Because that is who you are, right?
I agree.
Yeah. So I think like me coming from someone who reads a lot of Caribbean literature, or, that's what I did my PhD in because I'm a dork and I love it. I see that, but I wouldn't fault anybody for reading some of, like The Blue Beautiful World, for example, and perhaps not catching that in the same way they absolutely would in Redemption and Indigo, which I think it announces itself.
You put your finger on it, because I have said, although the Redemption novels are the overtly I am writing for my region books, just as Brandon says, Caribbean reviewers know where to find all the West Indian stuff in the Sigma Spade novels as well. I don't shut myself down just because I'm writing for a global audience. And we've discussed this before, Brandon. But I do, as I said, indulge myself a bit more, I think, when it comes to redemption novels. Yeah. It's hard. You see, these are hard questions to ask a writer. We are coasting. We are on the surfboard and we're just moving with the wave. And then afterwards you're like, so yeah, about that particular, curve, whatever. And you're just like, what? Yeah. Man, I was just moving. It's like hard for us.
It's like when someone is watching a cricketer on the pitch, is like they're making all these brilliant tactical decisions on the pitch, and you ask the actual batsman afterwards, and they're like, I just swing. The ball was in front of me, I just swing. But I do think that you are right, and I think the thing that I pick up about each series is what the Redemption novels are obviously doing in voice. I think the Cygnus Beta novels are obviously doing in subject matter. Like, I think anyone from the Caribbean will be aware of how politically aware those books are in ways that are unique, not just to the Caribbean. I think most readers from the Global South will particularly pick it up in The Best of All Possible Worlds, in ways that are, like, obvious and unavoidable, and I think that those are some of the beauties of those books as well, that there are different ways to quote-unquote be Caribbean, and that readers are finding it all the time.
See, this is why I always have to come on this podcast.
Oh God. So with that being said, because we are running out of time, but I do vividly remember the last time that you were here for The Blue Beautiful World, we had asked you what you were working on, and there was a thing that was in the works a thing that had I vaguely remember it only having a tentative name at that point, and I'm kind of curious.
The angel at the gate is in my agent's
Mhm.
hands. My agent, she has to read it now. I don't know what she'll make of it.
Can we
and-
email
Reading it
her?
is a good sign.
But wait a minute, Brandon, didn't I email you the draft? I thought I emailed you the draft.
I think if it's not already in my email, I think we had discussed that you meant to send it to me and that I never followed up. But we will check, because I definitely want to see the thing. I'm literally checking my email right now as we are live.
I may have forgotten to send it because I was traveling. Basically, I was traveling a lot over the last month, and I carved out some time to finish it, send it off to my agent, and then I had to prepare for more travel, and maybe I thought I sent it to you. Maybe I was like, yes, I must send this to Brandon, and then packed up everything. And
Yes, we had discussed
Yeah.
talking about it via email as recently as this May.
Mhm. I'm gonna send it to you so you can see what you think of it.
Please. And is this, I can't recall if we had discussed, is this also a redemption novel or is this a brand new thing?
It's a brand new thing. It's basically a novella length kind of thing. I didn't manage to crack 40,000. I think it's more like 36,000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
So call it a short novel, because in terms of the kind of the meat of the story, I do feel it feels novelish to me. And yes, it's completely its own world. The only really speculative thing about it is that it's set in a kind of a near alternate type future. I say alternate future because it's clear that some of the things in the past are not really our past, but it's also set a little further forward. So that's why I can call it an alternate future, where the UK is in a civil war.
Oh.
I gave it to my
Totally
agent,
alternate
actually.
future. That's not happening right now at all.
No.
And I gave it to my agent as she traveled to Worldcon, and various riots and protests were popping off, and I'm like, damn,
Yeah.
this is a hard thing to give somebody to read when they're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but we'll see what happens. I have some interesting feelings about it. It's probably the least speculative thing I've written. But I have some really like intense feelings about it, and I just need to speak to people who've read it and come on the other side. Yes, Brandon. I'm gonna email this to you right now, okay? because I'm gonna feel so guilty if I forget this again. Is that still windowslive.com?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cool.
Okay, good.
Look at Brandon getting to
This
read
is happening
stuff.
live on stream. I'm
This
not
is
sure.
awesome.
Oh Lord. I promise I am not special.
Listen. Yes, he's special. He's special.
I know all about Brandon and his he will coax things out of people, forcing me to read in public.
I begged him. I was like, please, can you have a look at this?
Yes. I would love very much to see it. I hope that you're also working on something else now that this has now left your hands.
Give me Kadir. I mean, that was like what, 3 weeks ago? Let me breathe.
Fair enough, yes.
Needs
Okay.
a break. Come on.
You are allowed to breathe. I apologize.
Hang on a second.
I'm just always excited to see your work, of course.
I just want to make sure I'm sending the right one. 0807. Yes, it should be this one.
Perfect.
Choose
there we
file.
go. Brandon now has an
Send.
unreleased short novel from the illustrious Karen Lord.
Ah,
I am
Look at
very
that.
excited to read it.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
so you're obviously taking a breather because you just finished a thing and did a bunch of travel. So if folks were to hunt you down on the internet in a very nice way to find
please,
you
in
and
a
your
nice way.
work. Yeah, sorry, I should not use the word hunt. If they
Yes,
would like to
maybe not.
find you
So
on the
broad,
internet,
Mhm.
where would they go?
So I think you already know about the Karen Lord. That's all one word. .wordpress.com. That's my site, which I do occasionally remember to update, and which at least has been properly revamped with all the new editions, with all their beautiful fresh covers and whatever. The only thing I haven't done, which I must do, is go back and and do a little more for the Spanish edition, the Spanish translation of Redemption and Indigo, which just came out with an absolutely lovely cover. Hang on a sec. Have I? Yeah, I don't have that here yet. I gotta update my website with that. But there's a Spanish one now, and I'm so pleased. Everybody's telling me how beautiful, amazing the translation is, and so forth. So yeah. Anyway, so that's my website. And then in terms of social media, I am on Instagram, though not on Threads. I am on Tumblr, but I lurk there. I don't post there like I should. Although if Golansk or somebody actually like posts something relevant to my books, I will repost it. And I'm also on Blue Sky, and I'm also on X, and all those places you will find me at Dr. Karen Lord, and that's Dr. Karen Lord.
Perfect.
Trying to get consistency. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I don't know if that means anything to anybody in the actual publishing community.
It might. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't. When I'm on LinkedIn, I have a slightly different kind of vibe to it. It's more writing adjacent things as opposed to writing things. Although I did mention like the long listing for the Women's Prize and stuff like that. So
that's right. We did not bring that up, but
indeed.
Oh wait. We didn't talk about that during. Oh no! Did we have our Blue Beautiful World podcast before that happened?
I'm just realizing that happened. So this is the first time that we're telling you congratulations.
We said it on the internet, but it's a little different when it's a face-to-face. But yes, congratulations.
Obviously very well deserved as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I mean, they don't usually pay attention to genre books, so for that alone, I'm just like hugely grateful.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'm also a little discombobulated because it's like, yeah, there are 2 more books before this one, people. You know, because although you can very honestly say the Blue Beautiful World is standalone, you and I know that when you know what came before, there's a whole bunch of stuff that just goes and hits you a lot harder.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But you know, maybe they'll just have to go backwards in time and read the others.
Exactly. And at least it's all these lovely fresh covers all together now, so
yeah, I know. It's so good. Reminder, everybody, if you're watching the video version, Redemption and Indigo, or if you're seeing it backwards like I am, I'm not going to try to read that, but okay. And then obviously Unraveling as well. There you go. Well, Karen, thank you very much for coming back.
Thank you.
This is
it's
wonderful.
It's always a pleasure. Yeah.
We're nice.
You're more than nice. You're intelligent. You're educated. You're eloquent.
I mean, Brandon
we try our very best.
Well, okay, folks. So we have to stop a podcast here very soon. So as a reminder, if you'd like to let us know what you thought, or you want to suggest a topic or something, skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We're Skiffy and Fanty. Most social media sites, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. That's just Skiffy and Fanty. And then we have a link tree for all our stuff, like our Patreon and all that good things, which is linktr.ee/Skiffy and Fanty. I'm at ShaunDuke.net. I'm on Alphabet Streams, which is where Skiffy and Fanty is live Fridays at 7. However, depending on when this comes out, I might still be discombobulated from moving, and so I may not be doing Tuesday, Thursday streams for, I don't know. I don't know exactly when this will come out in this process. So you can just find me on the internet. My link tree is /ShaunDuke.
And you can find me, Brandon O'Brien, almost everywhere on the internet at The Rising Tides, that's TITHES, on my newsletter, which is also my website at brandonobrien.xyz, and at speculatesf.com.
That's right. All right. I have to make it awkward, which is required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, which Brandon O'Brien has signed an agreement to. And so, as is always really important for me, today I will be immediately going to bed because I have been packing boxes literally all day. So this is not really that awkward. It's more I'm tired, y'all, and I need sleep, and I'm gonna go right to the bed. I'm going to turn my little fan on, and I'm going to fall asleep to Nightbreed again.
That's where we got back to, that's how you fall asleep?
You have no idea how many times I've fallen asleep to Nightbreed, Brandon. The director's cut, by the way, because I freaking love Nightbreed. That movie is amazing. I don't find it scary at all. I actually find it really fun and exciting. And yeah, I just love that movie. And if you were in the United States, I'm pretty sure it is on Tubi, the director's cut, for free with ads. I don't know where you could get it outside the United States, but if you get a chance to watch Nightbreed, the director's cut, it has a certain director of genre films plays a serial killer in it. I'll just leave it there. Okay. I think we did it. Is that awkward enough for you, Brandon?
Just a little bit, yes.
Okay. All right. I will be taking my trip to Midian now. On that note, awkward ending and scene.